Okay, let's think a little bit here about Dwarven Rails. As I've said in the intro and many times compared to, it's very much a Silverton-based game. I like Silverton a lot, and it's cool to have what amounts to something that's similar to it, but with a little different scenario basis than Silverton does. So on that side of it, if you already have Silverton, being able to expand it into something a little with some significant differences is pretty interesting. On its own, this game actually tries to resolve some issues that Silverton has. It plays a little shorter than the Silverton, well, it plays significantly shorter than the Silverton sort of grand campaign or longer games. But the short games of Silverton come in at a fairly small level. What's wrong with them is some of the scenarios you can get away with. But the problem with some of the shorter games is that there's a lot of map you're not exploring in Silverton. In this, the 12 turns or $700, which seem about the same, give you enough time to more or less get anywhere you want to get. So that's one kind of cool thing. Make the game a little shorter, but not make it feel like you're only playing half the game, basically. And it's still not a short game. I think it would feel really like way too little if it was much shorter than it is. Even though I was getting tired, that's more my mindset. I know normally, even with Silverton, I feel like, it should have gone just a little longer, we can get through everything. Let's talk a little about the components, I guess. There are some other facets that, before I get to the components, that it tries to beat Silverton on. One is by a streamlining and simplification of a lot of the rules. So, every mine costs you the same amount to buy. Every piece of track is either $2 or $3. Every passenger route costs you only $5. It's much easier. It makes it possible to remember all these things pretty easily without having to write them all on the cards, which allow these smaller cards, less information on them. The variable start, where you have these map cards that connect up in geomorphic different ways, allows you to have many, many more scenarios, basically, than Silverton does. And you don't exactly know what they're going to be, and you have to figure them out. It's not like you have, I guess there's so many permutations that these things can sit in any given number of players, but there's not a reasonable number of these that you can start figuring out the optimal routes and where you want to go. Not that you really can in Silverton either, but once you kind of know the game, you know where the probable distributions of the cards are going to be in Silverton. Here, another thing is, largely, the cards are fairly balanced in terms of the amount of mines that are available on them. But the most important thing is, right on them, they tell you exactly what's going to show up. There's one gold mine here, one gold mine here. There's an emerald mine in each of these three. Here there's a silver, 2 gold, and another gold up here. So, given that you probably see most of the deck, one way or another, some of them you may not get an option to get at. There are still luck factors in this. But you see most of the deck, and you see the layout and where everything's located at the beginning. This game's a lot less dependent on sort of that, hey, I played Silverton once or twice, and now I feel like I actually have a chance of, making a reasonable strategy in it. Like, games called Silverton, maybe I should go for Silverton, right? That seems reasonable. Yeah, it's not really that good an option. The game should be called Leadville. But anyway, with this one, everything's out in the open. You know what the distributions are and where everything is without having to kind of memorize the deck, and that could be very useful. No delivery limits. Everything is precious stones and metals, and that means you can haul whatever you like. Calculations for how much that you're able to transport are easier to make. A lot of that kind of streamlining. Some of it comes at costs though. By randomizing this, the deck of cards, the deck of tiles, they made the regular passenger routes not exactly work. So instead of Silverton style passenger routes, you have this kind of difficult to understand part because it's completely new, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I feel like these are the weakest rules in the game, and they're sort of the most innovative thing in the game. The way the passenger routes are handled is difficult to grasp and kind of difficult to spot on the board because your route may not all be in front of you. It may be combined with cards from other people's hands. And also, the rules for them are kind of hard to parse. I guess that's the biggest thing. And probably the hardest to parse out of everything in here. Let's talk about components. I guess one of the biggest negatives, I always go for the negatives for everything. These guys are, a little bendy. You can kind of counter bend them or whatever, but once they're set up on the board, they're going to get some they're not going to lie flat. And that probably means you should put some plexi over them. I'm not a big fan of plexi, but I would seriously think about doing it with this game if I had it with me. In fact, when I first set it up, I said, wow, I want plexi with these. This thing's kind of cool, except it gives you your setup rules on the back. And if you set up your pieces on here, the little, prices, well, you got to sweep them aside and sometimes look up things on here. Not a big deal once you actually get started, though, and you don't have to set these up until later in the order, no matter what. In fact, it is the last thing you do in the order, unless you screw something up. Little translucent cubes, I like them, they're pretty. And the additional number of things counters with the depletions on them, that all works pretty well. The only thing that kind of doesn't work is if something's depleted and there's nothing on it. It may have made sense to make like some of the 12s have blank depletions on the other side. It's not a big deal. You can turn the cards so that, it's obvious that it's depleted or something. But it's just sort of, there's one way of handling it if you have these bonus chits that doesn't work anymore if you don't. And then the differentials between the different surveyors and prospectors, they work fine. I had some worries, well, shouldn't the prospector have a P on it or something like that? You don't need it. By keeping track of them on the cards, it's fairly easy to keep track of things. Like in the Mayfair edition of Silverton, the maps are a little crowded and there's no little boxes or anything, so your cubes sometimes can kind of wander and you might not be sure they're in the right place. That could get to be a problem. Of course, there's tiny track segments that you might miss, like I did in my play. I guess the scariest thing, and I mean otherwise, the component quality seems pretty decent. It's funny, whatever printing that GameCrafter does, it leaves a little ridge everywhere where there's printing. That's kind of weird. It doesn't really bother me when it's on the cards too. If this was a game where you were selecting cards from people's hands, that would be kind of funky. I don't know how I feel late in the game. There was like a place where somebody had to drop a cube and that affected things. I'm never really thrilled with that kind of rule. Not really a component issue at all. The rulebook itself, okay. So I definitely had trouble with the newest of the rules, the way the passenger cards are handled in this. And I struggled with them, and I think I got it right at the end eventually. Maybe, I don't know. But they definitely were troublesome for me. I'm not sure how much the rest of the rules were made easier. They certainly were by knowing Silverton in advance. They don't, there's the Luigi's on here too. I know reading through it, I could say, I know I'm looking at a Silverton-like game, but what am I talking about? And part of that just has to do with, hey, here's the map, what? Stuff like that. I didn't have the pieces laid out or anything. I just remember it didn't sink in quite as clearly as Silverton did the first time I think I read that. Otherwise, well, do you want this? If you have Silverton, like I said, yeah, probably this is pretty interesting if you already have Silverton, because it does, and like it, because it does add to the positions you have. It is not necessarily easier to approach in terms, like I said, the rule book is a little hard to grok, I think. It's not like it's terribly wrong, it just somehow didn't sink in as easily. But on the other hand, there are other aspects to it that do make it easier. It makes it easier to play. If somebody knows this and teaches it to, 3 other players, I feel like everybody's got a reasonable shot at playing out the game. They can see what the distributions on the board are. They can see where things are located near them. They can make reasonable judgments in a way that it's really hard to do in Silverton. You look at this map and you say, I got no idea where anything is. Maybe each place has one mine. Oh wait, no, this one's gotten 4 so far. What the hell's up with that? And some of them might be really lousy, etc. Most of the mines in this feel approximately equal. You might still crap out. Oh, component-wise, one thing. I already cannibalized it, but it only comes with 1 die, which is sufficient to play, but not pleasant if you only have 1 die. Now, most of us have dice, so that's not a big deal at all. The only thing is, if you just bought it and unwrap it in the store and want to play it, well, maybe you got to buy a couple dice. Not many. Honestly, an extra die in it would make up for that completely, because there's just one place during competitions where both players have to roll 2 dice, and I don't think 4 dice is necessary. I think that 2 dice works out fine, because one person can roll 2 dice, the other person rolls 2 dice, boom. You just pass them. But each person having to roll twice, that seems a little over the top. On the other hand, I wouldn't have been shocked at all if it had no dice in it, because we're gamers, we're gonna have dice. Nobody's gonna buy this in the Monopoly type setup, and you might not always have your dice with you, but you can probably scavenge some somewhere without a problem. Anyway, that's just my feeling there now. So if you don't have Silverton, this is, like I said, a shorter game that gives you sort of the feeling that you're having the full experience. When you play Silverton for anything except the long game, and even to some extent with the long game, you feel like there's a little bit missing or a lot missing, just because most of the board's not, come into play or whatever. And that can be kind of disconcerting. And you also don't expect to see all of the mines come out, which can be disconcerting. For my own tastes, I prefer Silverton to this. I think mainly because it's historical. You know, that just makes me happier. I also like some of the subtlety, not subtlety, but the different choices you have to make in Silverton based on whether or not there's a limited amount of a material that you can deliver at once. With this, all of them are unlimited. Sure, it's a simplification, but with all of them unlimited, they kind of all feel the same, and it doesn't feel like you're not configuring yourself based on the type of materials that you're hauling. If you're a big coal and lumber hauler in Silverton, you have a different kind of train profile than if you're hauling gold and silver. So that's kind of a neat aspect. And you also have a different profile how you approach the markets. And I like those extra layers that Silverton produces. What else do I like? One over the other. Just trying to think if there's anything else in Silverton that really, because okay. So one may be more of me being used to Silverton already, which is when you prospect for personalities in this game, which include the trains, it includes the surveyors and prospectors. I think it's kind of cool that they're all in one deck, but when you prospect for them, it doesn't matter what kind of agent you have. And I feel like that agent should give a bonus. I don't think they should reduce the base price, but they might be able to give you additional bid on that base price or something like that. So your initial price, say it's a 7 base bid, you'd have to bid, let's say you had a +2 agent, you'd have to bid 9, but you'd get 2 off the price or something like that. I don't know, Again, trying to describe that would be complicated. I'm also, what definitely is just purely not being as used to, I had trouble remembering that I bid on those, as opposed to just dicing off on them. And that's kind of annoying, and I kind of like just the dicing off. I understand why the bidding's there, and I think that works fine. And it's kind of cool to have a bidding mechanism in the game. In fact, it might have made sense to get rid of the bonus surveyors and prospectors and go with pure bidding game. That would be much, much more Euro-y in terms of the type of game it is. Anyway, this gives you an interesting Silverton-like experience. And I don't know how hard Silverton is to find these days. Obviously, it probably is impossible to find new, but used copies show up, I'm sure, at reasonable prices. But on the other hand, this, you can get a hold of this right away, and it also has a somewhat smaller footprint, which I think is probably more appealing to the modern gamer. You're not talking about an 8 to 10 hour game here. You're probably talking more in the 4 to 6 range, depending on how much AP you have and how slow you are. Not that Silverton can't be played in less time with some of the shorter scenarios. It's just, like I said, they don't feel like you're playing the full game. You feel kind of cheated when you do. Okay, let's end this up.